Hi guys, Tech here, and I wanted to go over some of the builds that I am recommending as 3.18 League Starters. Some of them are my builds, some of them are other people's builds, but I did want to give a pretty wide variety of different types of plays, different ascendancies, things of that nature, just so you have the best League Start experience for the content that you are trying to do. Two of these builds, which will be the first two, are going to be for non-Pentacle content. So they're good League starters if you are planning on just getting into the game or mapping. However, I do not recommend them if you're wanting to do the hardest of content in the game, just because the cost to scale them up is going to be quite a bit higher than the other builds that are mentioned in the video. And so it's not that they can't do Pinnacle content, it is the investment required to do Pinnacle content is going to be substantially higher. Most of these are going to be in the 100 to 200x range for if you're looking at doing 2 to 300 million DPS. However, the two that I'm recommending would easily be double or triple that to get to the same damage totals, which is why I would recommend them for League starting, but not necessarily for Pinnacle content. One other quick housekeeping note before we get started is we will be opening up the guild. If you would like more info into that, I will have a link to the Discord in the comment section down below where you can apply if that is something that interests you. All right, let's get into the build guide. All right, so this is going to be my hardcore character that was a dual strike slayer. So we are going crit eventually and Ellie eventually. However, it would work perfectly fine for softcore. There is two trees to this. There's a more offensive and a more defensive tree. I did play the more defensive side of the tree. However, you can absolutely use the more offensive side of the tree if you are on softcore. This is one of those builds that it's great for initially farming currency as long as you do have some basic crafting knowledge with melee, or you don't mind learning how to do the easier crafts with melee, such as essence spamming to get either flat lightning, cold, or fire added to attacks, and then bench crafting one of those on. Normally use lightning and then bench craft on cold or fire, depending on what rolls you get. Or if you are still in the leveling process, you can spam with the essence of Reed, I believe it is. It gives flat fizz, and then craft percent physical damage on top of that, which will give you a pretty strong weapon for your item level. So as long as you're comfortable doing those kind of things, this is an absolutely great League starter. I played it in the hardcore, which was a melee only event. It can hit thresholds, which are a little difficult to overcome, so you need to upgrade your gear. But if you're in trade league, you can always buy gear instead of having to craft it. It's just basically depending on what you want to play. The one thing I will say about this build is it will get a lot of damage with investment. However, to get really high end damage, it is going to be a significant investment. You're probably going to be spending, you know, close to 100 exalts worth of currency to get in-game weapons that are going to be, you know, 1,000 plus DPS weapons. So it can get very expensive for if you're trying to scale up to Pinnacle content. So I wouldn't recommend it for that. But if you're trying to get into mapping and then build something else that kind of requires a pretty solid investment to get started, this is something that's very good for that. All right, so this is going to be my 3.17 Bladefall build guide. Now, with Pentacle content, I would like to preface that while this is a great League starter, I would not recommend this build for Pinnacle content. The amount of investment to get that to that like 2 to 300 million threshold that I'm expecting to need for Pinnacle content is going to be a little bit too expensive, in my opinion, compared to other options. However, if you're looking for a character that is going to be kind of fun to play, is a little bit different, and your end game goal is not to do the new bosses, then this is a great build option for you. This is going to be more beginner / intermediate friendly than it is going to be advanced advanced friendly. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so the next build is Ziz's EA Champion. Now, this is going to be something I can definitely recommend for hardcore players, as well as something that is going to very well scale with the gear investment, kind of the same way Absolution does. It starts out with very little to no budget, but it does scale well with investment. Now, that is something that's a little bit different than like the Lightning Strike build, which is you have this initial baseline of investment that's almost required to play the build, but once you do that, it gets very, very powerful very quickly. These are a little more even progression, so if you want a smooth experience and you don't mind the totem playstyle, this is a very solid build for either softcore or hardcore. I know there is some debate between the champion version and the elementalist version. The reason I would lean towards the champion version is we are going to have harder content, and I would really suggest either going champion or inquisitor even, as those two versions would have the two best forms of survivability, champion getting fortify, inquisitor getting the recovery, which are both very, very strong with totem builds. All right, guys, for this one, this is the real JamesHumphrey Lightning Strike Juggernaut. Now, the reason why I picked the Juggernaut one specifically is because the Juggernaut version of this I have actually played. I have not played the Raider version. I have not played the Champion version, which I think is the newest build idea. This one is going to be a little bit weird as far as league starting, because you really want the replica last resort clause to get the maximum amount of DPS for the budget version, which this is, I think, the 60C budget version. The thing I like about the Juggernaut version is it's very, very tanky and it has great survivability options. Plus, it is fairly reasonable on the league start part of things. And this is my Skelly-Lution build, as I dubbed it, but it's summon skeleton mages plus Absolution. It is very strong for clear speed as well as bossing content. Skelly mages are amazing at clear speed. Absolution is great at bossing content, and it scales up really well when you're going into pinnacle stuff. Now, this is very high investment, so you're going to notice some deaths on this one because we are doing crazy modifiers. Obviously, if you're playing hardcore, you're probably not trying to farm stuff in Innocence Blast at T16 levels, but I digress. This is a very, very solid build, as it was able to do all the new content fairly easily, and it has a lot of room for scaling. Just note that you're going to have to invest into a Elder Shaper Bone Helmet if you really want to get that highest tier of damage possible from the build. All right, and this is Path and Math Seismic Trapper. The Seismic Trapper is going to be a kind of a different playstyle if you've never played traps before. There is a lot of waiting on the damage, but the damage is definitely there. So it's something to consider if you're not completely like, no traps for me. Trapping also feels a lot better post 3.15 than it did since like 3.0 till then. So if you haven't played traps in a while, you may try it. It is a very solid build. It does give you a decent amount of survivability with quite a lot of physical scaling. One of the nice things about this build is you can run 2 cold iron points, which even if they are expensive early game, they will go down in price fairly dramatically, like by day 5 or 6. And you're probably not going to be pushing pinnacle content on the first day or 2 anyways. It's probably something you're going to ramp into. So keep that in mind for pricing on a lot of these kind of builds. That yes, it may be very, very expensive the first day or 2. Just make currency the first day or 2, and then, you know, day 4 or 5, you know, start buying what you need for the pinnacle gear. Don't try to rush to pinnacle, especially if you're not used to rushing to the very in-game content. I wouldn't recommend trying to do that from scratch this league for sure. All right, guys, so this one may be familiar if you tried my Delve Spellslinging build. This is VDDD Spellslinger. This is going to be a league starter that can transition into pinnacle content with a little bit of a respec once you get get into the end game, and it will provide a very, very high level of DPS plus a very solid clear speed experience through the axe, just because Spellslinger is very smooth through the axe naturally. Now, one thing to kind of note for this type of build is this may not be the tankiest option out the gate. If you are playing hardcore, there is an alternative leveling setup for self-casting DD in the build node. So if you do want that tankier experience, follow that. The trees are identical, it just is a different leveling setup, so you can run auras instead of running Spellslinger auras. All right, I hope this video has been helpful to you and you have learned something or seen something that may be piqued your interest for 3.18 Sentinel League. If you did stay tuned this far into the video, feel free to comment Sentinel hype down below, and I will go ahead and give a guild invite, no questions asked, to one of the people who does comment down below. Anyway, have a wonderful rest of your day and have a great 3.18 League start, Exiles.